Hey there. How's it going? I've missed you. Now it's just me and you. I don't have another guy to talk to. I wanted to talk about stuff that I've been listening to for the past month and a half or so, things that I've picked up. Call it a playlist. I'm not going to call it a collection update because I don't want to. I don't want to use that nomenclature anymore. You know what I mean? I'm Pat, by the way, Ground Zero Salem. To kick things off, I want to talk about this latest Malleus record. This just came out last month, I want to say, very beginning of the year, and it is piping hot. Piping hot black metal record. It's a lot thrashier than their last couple. Their first two were a bit more on the raw side. Storm of Witchcraft was kind of more like a Celtic Frost, Hellhammer sort of thing. And Night Raids was a little bit, very much like that still, but leaning into like maybe early Emperor, like Wrath of the Tyrant-ish sort of stuff. That was just a 2-song EP. Really long songs, but a 2-song EP. With Fires of Heaven, the new one, what we've got is far more of a developed kind of thrash metal influence mixed in with the black. Moments of it kind of remind me of Ara Noir a little bit at their best, which is not a bad thing by any stretch. You can really taste the Metallica influence, like the first two Metallica albums, Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, of course. This copy came on gray marble, very nice, put out by Armageddon Shop. Lyrically, the themes kind of revolve around early America and colonialism and the evil brought forth by it. The original cover art featured a bunch of slain colonists around a historic cottage in Salem. All the actors were covered in fake blood in the freezing cold. I was one of them. For whatever reason, they decided to not go ahead with the photos. And now we have this beautiful painting, which I think is a more or less a happy accident. Cool booklet that comes with this. Armageddon really pulled out all the stops. This I can never tell the difference between Dore and Durer. It's one of the two. Woodcut guys. Yeah, really great record. Riffs aplenty. I'm already calling it being on my album of the year list, in 10 months or whenever that is. Super good. We're going to talk about some 7 inches next, I think. Chainsaw, another Boston area band. Malleus is from Boston, if I didn't mention that. When Will We Die? Heavily Brit punk kind of influenced, UK 82 and Riot City Records, that kind of stuff. Very D-beat as well. Raw, fast, hardcore. I wouldn't call it straight up D-beat. It's got a little bit more like kind of pogo rhythms going on and catchiness to it, but it's very influenced by that stuff, that D-beat kind of stuff. So nasty, really good. Hop in the Wayback Machine here. I remember hearing about the People's War I think when I was reading Heart Attack a bunch, and probably when I was running my first distro. I used to have a distro that I ran when I lived in Maine that I didn't do mail order. I exclusively went to shows and sold records at hardcore shows. And around that era, I think I got Evilution Heart Attack. Evilution was the label. I got Heart Attack every issue it came out. It was free. I think I got it mailed to my house. I seem to remember a tour journal of the People's War in it, or maybe it might have been Maximum Rock and Roll. I'm not entirely sure. But I come to find out years and years and years later that this was Austin from Panopticon's band, his hardcore band. I think his first band. I think that's him playing guitar there. And this is when he lived in Memphis. This is a Memphis-based band. And I feel like Memphis did kind of have a sort of token sound. It's where Death Threat was from, and His Hero Is Gone, most famously, before most of those folks relocated to Portland, Oregon. And what we have is just fast, ripping, somewhat kind of noisy, falling apart on the edges, dark, political hardcore. So certainly if you dig the aforementioned, you'd probably get something out of this. I also picked up the demo because it's a lot of the same songs, but I really like this recording. I've been meaning to pick it up for forever. Then we got Antisystem, Defense of the Realm EP. A pretty ripping UK hardcore band that doesn't really get enough shine, I don't think. They're one of those bands that also kind of sits uncomfortably between the more apolitical street punk kind of shit, like the aforementioned Riot City stuff, and anarcho punk, like a little bit more serious political lyrically. Musically, it's pretty heavy. It's for punk. It's very aggressive and angry. Not really leaning into the crossover metallic stuff so much, but certainly if you like early Conflict and early Exploited and kind of faster, anthemic, catchy 3-chord hardcore punk, Antisystem would fill that need for you if you haven't checked them out yet. Then a new band that I hear a lot about, and to be fair, I haven't really been in the mood for stuff like this, so I've only spun it once, but it is very good. It's Judy and the Jerks, and they come from a Hattiesburg, Mississippi, I think is the scene where it's kind of a random town, but there's a ton of bands coming out of there right now, hardcore and punk bands. And this is what I think was referred to as egg punk like 5 or 6 years ago, where it's punk and it's scrappy and loud and fast, but it kind of leans more into like a new wave sort of influence and Devo and stuff like that. It is super fun, super catchy, like punk rock stuff. And I guess they just came out with a record late last year, I want to say, and that was on a lot of people's lists and stuff. I guess it's really good. I'll give this more of a shot when I'm in the mood for less like Neanderthal music. Um, Speaking of which, got the Never Ending Game 7-inch Halo and Wings. I thought this was brand new. It turns out it's a couple years old. I think it's came out past the full length on Triple B by a year or two. But I love this band, Never Ending Game. They're from Detroit. Super heavy, hardcore, brutal stuff. It's got a heavy groove to it, like a thick groove. If you're a fan of a lot of like scary 90s hardcore like Cold as Life and Sheer Terror, it's along those lines, very metallic kind of riffing and everything, but a certain kind of bounce to it. A lot of like similar to a lot of like Baltimore bands from that era too. Next Step Up, I hear, is a big influence or a band that sounds like them. But yeah, nasty, thuggish, heavy hardcore. Hopefully, I don't get pinched for this Judy Priest song that's playing in the background. There's a really cool tape label on Instagram that does what you would call fan club editions. And this is probably my favorite out of the batch that I've picked up. This is the Black Uniforms Splatterpunks on Acid. It's a compilation. I'm having such an issue with stuff not being in focus. There we go. Yeah, Swedish band, metallic punk. Featured members of a lot of notable Swedish hardcore bands. I believe Anti-Cymex is one of them, or Anti-Kymex, however you're supposed to say that. Tons of songs on this. Looks like well over 20. And a really well put together DIY release of this. Shredding stuff, very fast. Again, sort of D-beat driven, but not puritanical D-beat. Very metallic. You know, if you like Broken Bones and English Dogs and stuff like that, definitely do it for you. Then we've got Imprecation in Nomine Diaboli. I like Imprecation a lot. They're one of those bands that's been around forever that I don't think had much output in their original incarnation, but since have returned and put out a string of like pretty good releases since then. They're a Texas band, old standing dudes that have been around forever, and you know, I'm a supporter of new death metal, new wave of old school death metal stuff. I like that stuff. I like to hear younger people's interpretations of the classics of old, but there is really something to be said for old heads doing it as intended. You know, doing the classic death metal style. This is very much in the vein of a lot of infernal, kind of volcanic, satanic death metal from days past. You know, pre-Morbid Angel, I'd say. Some of the more straightforward incantation material, Immolation, Vital Remains. It's just very satanic, riffy death metal. It doesn't get too technical or complex, but it's very accomplished musically. Then I just spun this in the kitchen while making dinner. It's a classic. Death is just the beginning too. Just a veritable who's who of everything that was great on Relapse and Nuclear Blast America. at a certain time, very early 90s. Actually, this might just be Nuclear Blast. They kind of bled it over into each other, but it's got all the hits. Dismember, Mortification, Defecation, Hypocrisy. There's not a bad jam on here, except maybe that Fetish 69 song didn't really need to be there. But everything else on here is just a who's who. It's a rogues gallery of the finest death metal bands that were on that label. And man, I was thinking about printing costs and stuff, like how much it costs to release cassettes. And nowadays, most of the cassettes you'll see, well, that Imprecation actually looked really good. It unfolded a bunch of times, but J cards used to be long back in the day. Look at this. Does anybody do this anymore? That goes halfway down the hallway when you unfurl it. Shit's crazy. Great album. Oh, this is put it on the tape. This is that Malleus, y'all. Real good. Song's called Beyond the Pale. It jams. It was the big single they put out. Funeral Nation After the Battle. Another group of stalwarts there. Some real weathered warriors of the Metal of Death from Chicago. This is a compilation of a bunch of stuff. These guys are still at it. I think they're selling the CD on their Bandcamp, which is where I got it very reasonably. And this is just awesome. It sounds a lot like really stripped down, maybe first two albums era Slayer, but a little bit more evil, even a little bit more, slightly more guttural vocals, but we're not talking real heavy growls or anything like that. Bears some similarity to other Chicago bands, which makes sense, like Master and bands of that ilk. It's really fucking good. Upfront movement. All right, let's jump over to some Posicore. That's abrupt. Yeah, I really liked one record by this band that I just picked up, actually, which is Daybreak, which is kind of weird that I like it so much, but I think I latched onto it when I was younger and just never left me kind of thing. But Daybreak is very melodic, almost the beginning of like emotional hardcore, kind of in the same boat as bands like Turning Point, who... Do I have their tape? No. Turning Point just had their album reissued as well. It's Almost Darkest Before the Dawn, or It's Always Darkest Before the Dawn. Both bands, Upfront and Turning Point, are just a progression out of youth crew hardcore into something a little bit different. Most of the time, people just refer to it as melodic hardcore. So there's a little bit more singiness to the vocals. There's a little bit more, maybe a little bit more depth to the lyrics, as opposed to just, trying to be a good dude or being stabbed in the back. There's a little bit more complex personal strife kind of lyrics being explored. And I really was curious about this Movement record because it came out, maybe it was recorded earlier. I don't know. I couldn't find any information on it, but this Connecticut hardcore band recorded this in 1997. And it is a pretty fast melodic hardcore record. And there was a bit of an upsurge in youth crew hardcore and fast hardcore in the late 90s. It was sort of a backlash against the more metallic stuff that was going on within straight edge hardcore in particular. But I had no idea that this was recorded then. And it's kind of weird. Just because I never heard about them. They're from the East Coast. They were from New Jersey, and I never heard about them playing anywhere. So I don't know if this was shelved or what. But I mean, 18 songs, pretty fast, pretty melodic. It's a fun listen. I do not like it as much as I like Daybreak. I was hoping it would have the energy of the Daybreak record, but not the case. In a similar vein, Ignite, Call on My Brothers. This is so posy and so melodic and so well produced, which I think it came out in the mid 90s at some point. It's the guy can sing so well, Zoli, that he could do like Blind Guardian shit if he wanted to. Yeah, it's very accomplished musically, very polished, especially for the time. It's a cool record. They were really good live. For those of you who may not be familiar with this type of stuff so much, I mean, try to imagine Minor Threat, but with the musicianship. And Minor Threat actually could play pretty well. Musicianship dial turned way up, essentially. A lot more like, epic kind of intros and stuff like that. Kiss It Goodbye. I've been meaning to get into this band since the 90s, I think. It was half of the band Dead Guy that moved out to Seattle. The documentary on Dead Guy is really interesting. I recommend, even if you're not a fan of that type of music or hardcore or whatever, check it out. It's a pretty cool story. And Dead Guy themselves were this really interesting intersection of hardcore as it was at the time and a strong influence from like amphetamine, reptile, noise rock, and touch and go kind of stuff. They owed just as much to their sound to Jesus Lizard and Big Black as they did the Cro-Mags, in my opinion. And they also had a little bit of like weird tech death kind of influence coming in as well. They had ties to Human Remains. There was a Human Remains member that played in the band later on, a later a later incarnation of Dead Guy. And then they split in half, and half the band continued as Dead Guy, and the other half went out to, like, the singer and I think the guitarist went out to Seattle to form this band, Kiss It Goodbye, who were thematically pretty similar and musically similar, but even more desperate and tweaked and scary than Dead Guy. Longer songs, extremely punishing music, coming from a very personal and dark place. Yeah, Kiss It Goodbye. She Loves Me, She Loves Me Not is the name of the record. I saw this at nice price and I said to myself, you gotta own some Nile. Why don't you own any Nile, Pat? Own some Nile. Buy some Nile. You've seen them a dozen times. You've never bought anything by them. Black Seeds of Vengeance, the classic Nile record. You know it. You love it. You know, Egyptian folklore and history influenced death metal. Very, very big in the late 90s. Played a ton. Incredibly accomplished musicians that were just as good at composition as they were technical skill. Carl Sanders, hell of a player, hell of a writer. Yeah, brutal but catchy. I remember when they came out, they were kind of thought of, at least in my sphere of friends, as like the new Morbid Angel. And this is probably their best. If you're a metalhead watching this, you probably are well aware of who they are. Then Run for Your Fucking Life. And nobody's going to watch this. It's going to get demonetized. Such a big deal over swears these days. Grow up. Run for Your Effing Life. So this is just a small, lesser-known band from San Diego, I want to say, that was around in the late 90s. This came out on Gloom Records. Gloom Records, one of the best hardcore labels of the early 2000s, run by Nate from Devoid of Faith and Monster X, put out an endless stream of excellent hardcore records from The Prowl, Close Call, put out a Toxic Holocaust record, just put out a stream of bangers in the early days. This is one of the lesser ones that I feel is talked about, which is a damn shame. It's a crying shame. It's great, screamy, aggressive, fast hardcore that feels like it's still kind of holding on to the that San Diego sound a little bit, like the Gravity Records stuff, but also being kind of thrash. And I don't mean thrash metal, I mean thrash hardcore, which is, you know, just really fast hardcore. Yeah, maybe I'll jump back over to LPs. I picked this up at Sorry State maybe a month or two ago. I think I'd heard of them, but they're just somewhere lurking in the back of my brain, and not really the first thing I thought of when I think of Mystic Records bands, of which there are many. Doug Moody, Mystic Records, Social Spit, There's No Place Like Home. Marvel at this cover art for just a little bit here. Look at that. That's really something. Mad Mark Rude did that. One of the better illustrators of the 80s hardcore. And this is goofy, fast hardcore with a bit of a kind of crossover thing going on. It's fun. Certainly if you dig, I don't know, if you're a big Adrenaline OD head or bands like that, it has that sort of early NoFX, even RKL. It has that certain early 80s kind of lighthearted, goofy sort of thing going on with it. More mid 80s, really, actually. But. Then Blindfold, Restrain the Thought. This was one of those records also that I just started thinking about it and how I had the CD in the 90s and I wasn't sure if it was actually really like good, but I wanted to hear it again. I listened to it on streaming a bunch of times A lot better than I remembered it. I remember not digging the vocals. They're kind of a little bit on the strained side, like pained, emotional, kind of hardcore vocals, uh, sort of like Endpoint or something like that. Kind of singy, bordering on what would be considered emo at a certain time, like in a 90s context, definitely not in a 2000s context. This band was Belgian. Blindfold, Restrain the Thought. And what's interesting about it, the music's mid-pace, kind of metallic, crunchy, moshy kind of stuff, but there's a few parts where there's just strings for apparently some reason, but it goes real peaceful for a few hints there, here and there. Yeah, it's got these sort of doomy kind of extra instrumentation sort of moments with strings, and I believe female vocals too. Really interesting listen. I'm glad it's one of those records where you can get it for a song, and it was pretty cheap, and I was like, I'm glad I bought that. That's kind of different. Skew Whiff, I think I talked about this with Eric, but just to reiterate, this record rules. uh, a member of Scavin and Medication Time, with a couple of dudes from Hiatus and one British guy. It's a project band. It's really heavy crust. um, goes forward at kind of a straight hardcore punk clip for a bit, and then gets considerably more dark and metallic, and it's fucking great. Skew Whiff, Tadium Vitae. I mentioned the Annihilated as well. Real blistering hardcore. This just came out. Very fucking raw. It's got that a true rawness to it that feels like it would, or sounds like it was recorded on analog equipment, as opposed to a lot of newer grind bands that kind of have this forced, brick walled, kind of sterile, sandpaper kind of recording that I really don't like. This just sounds like it was recorded on crappy equipment with everything cranked up super high. Has a very strong kind of, British and touches of D beat here and there, but I get some, mid 80s New York hardcore vibes on it too, which is cool. I've heard comparisons to Life's Blood. There's touches there that are, I think they probably might have been listening to the same bands. Hard to say if it's, Life's Blood's a hard band to replicate, when you put it that way. All right, and then we got this Lotion record. This is a wild one. Multinational Corporation. Been familiar with this band for a while, or at least I was aware of their deal. They're from New York. They came out and were playing with my friend's band Sadist a bunch about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think they've kept chugging along steadily since then. I was aware that it was like mechanized, almost kind of industrial punk stuff, and that's pretty much what it is. It's real weird, real abrasive, stripped down, kind of drum machine driven. I wouldn't say straight up crust. It's kind of its own thing, but it's decidedly very, very punk and heavy and gross. But yeah, it's cool. It's a fun listen. I'm finally glad I got something by them. I know they have a previous record or two that are also very good. I need to track those down. Black Flag live at the On Broadway, 23rd of July, 1982. This is a great fan club edition here. I love this set. I had it downloaded a couple of years ago. I was kind of wondering when and if it was going to make the fan club edition circuit. This is an era of Black Flag that sadly didn't last very long. It was with Chuck Biscuits on drums. Chuck Biscuits, who was in Danzig, DOA, Social Distortion, and maybe a few others I'm forgetting. But just a great, powerful era of this band. They recorded a demo with him that was almost album length, and then it just didn't work out. They had some issues with Unicorn Records, who were like a semi-major label, not releasing Damaged, and they decided to go with their own imprint, and it put a big damper on the whole momentum of the band, and there was all this legal stuff. And during that time, Chuck Biscuits left, unfortunately. But this is great. They're so tight on this. It's a good bridge of the gap between everything up to Damaged, which was, faster, more punk kind of era Black Flag stuff that was getting progressively more experimental by the Damaged era, and then the later stuff, which gets pretty wild ass, kind of like more metal influenced in a weird kind of 70s metal way, and a little bit more like their own version of prog, which is not really prog. But yeah, a little bit more experimental era Black Flag stuff that were to come later that was a little bit more rockish, we'll say. Great set. They sound awesome. Henry's getting into arguments with the crowd. It's good stage banter. It's good stuff. See if there's anything else in here I really want to talk about right now. Talk about the 7 inches. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I got some whole pile of grind here, courtesy of Mortville Noise. I have not talked about this stuff yet. He sent this shit to me months ago. A lot has been going on with me. I've been busy. I want to, give some time to dedicate to listen to all this filth. And so now I'm finally talking about it. This is Mogged or M-A-G-T. I don't know. Off-mogged. Tried to figure out where these folks were from. Didn't seem to find anything. Judging by the song titles, they're somewhere in Scandinavia. Short album. This is only 8 songs. It's really nasty grind, leaning into like maybe a bit of death metal, touches of it here and there. Obviously, really, really quick songs. It's Mortville Noise. It's going to be quick songs, but really fucking cool band. I really like this a lot. I want to hear more. Let's see if I can censor this one. Kakasanika. This is just a massive discography. Grind band from Ecuador. 2 discs. One of these bands that was around forever, did 1 million splits. There's no less than 18 releases on this, and it's noisy grind. I hear the term noise grind thrown around with reckless abandon. I never know exactly what that is. When you started delving into stuff like this, it's a little bit different for somebody like me. I know my Lerm and my Fear of God and early Napalm Death, of course, and early Cripple Bastards. That's pretty much the context I have for stuff like this. When I hear the term noise grind, a lot of the time I expect kind of like the Syracuse band Fed Ash or some Full of Hell stuff that kind of plays with power electronics, like that kind of noise, like, harsh noise mixed with grind. This is noise in the sense that it's recorded in a very, very raw manner. Extremely, very punk rock, like recorded super raw, which I love. Recorded on analog equipment, no doubt. Most of it was recorded in the 90s from what I can see. Harsh, blistering, doesn't take itself too seriously. There's like kind of weird, kind of clean parts, and you can tell there's in jokes and goofy shit on it. Another one from Mortville, the Reeking Cross Sidetracked split. Reeking Cross do 30 untitled tracks in like 5 minutes or something like that. 5 or 6 minutes, I believe. Just rips your head off. Very chaotic, blurred, grindcore shit. Sidetracked, I've been hearing about for quite a while. I'm friends with one of the members on Facebook. Seems like a cool guy. Jay. They're from Pacific Northwest, Seattle area, I think. And I've been hearing about Sidetracked for years, and now I want more. This is some of the most abrasive music I've ever heard. And I've listened to a lot of pretty abrasive music. Like, it blew out one of my headphones listening to it at a normal volume. Cheaper headphones that I have that I bring to work while I'm bored. And it sounds like the levels on each song kind of shift around. And the songs are obnoxiously short. We're talking 3 to 6 seconds. It almost feels like they're piecing together a greater whole. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but they're very, very, very heavy, abrasive. Sounds like maybe, what was once a power violence band, but now doing something far more almost so blown out and crazy sounding. It's avant-garde. It's fucking wild. It's good. And got the new Gasudar Malignant Altar split. Gasudar is a heavy kind of doom death band from Russia, and they did an EP, I want to say about 2 years ago, that was very good. And then, of course, Malignant Altar. They were barely here for a moment. Everybody fell in love with them. It's their last recording. Malignant Altar always, to me, sounded heavily influenced by Morbid Angel, but only the slower Morbid Angel songs. And they kind of keep that momentum going on this last release. There's just 2 songs by each band. Gasudar, very, very like cavernous and engulfing kind of doom death stuff, but there's something to it. There's riffs there. It's quite good. So yeah, that's great. Picked this up by a recommendation from Brain Smasher, this Evilution band, Shrine of Desecration, Connecticut death metal band from '98. This was put out by none other than Jamie Josta of Hatebreed. And this is just straight up evil death metal. It's not just a clever name, Evilution. It sounds a lot like Deicide. It's this strain of stuff that I was hearing here and there from the late 90s, where a lot of death metal at that time was going for like a really kind of slammy suffocation sort of thing, or dying fetus. But there are still bands doing the satanic thing and kind of like an infernal evil kind of deal, with also involving some of those rhythms from the aforementioned. And Evilution's one of those bands. Kind of reminds me of Hometown Heroes, Violent Fury. That's a massive compliment coming from me, where it's kind of like Deicide turned up a notch. It's a little bit heavier, but it's got those kind of almost sort of Deicide vocals. Jump back to tapes here for a second. This is the most chaotic update that I've done. I usually do format specific updates and stuff, and I'm just going through a pile of crap like some kind of maniac. We got Morser, 2 Hours to Doom. It's a compilation, German metallic hardcore from the late 90s. That whole Bremen scene that was like super chaotic metallic hardcore shit. All good bands. Acme probably being my favorite. Morser's a little bit more grind than their contemporaries, a lot faster songs, kind of still kind of technical for what they were doing, but very all over the place and pretty nuts. Death grind kind of stuff. Death grind played by like skinny hardcore dudes. And then Nocturnal Trinity. My friend in Rochester put this out. He's been putting out like just tapes from his local scene from back in the day. And that's cool. I like when people kind of dig stuff up that other folks may not have heard decades in the future. And this was like raw black metal stuff that was way before the era of the kind of punkish black metal that became popular because of Bonal or whatever, but unintentionally it's kind of coming from the same sort of place. It's kind of, black metal, but played by like punk dudes and stuff, kind of crusty dudes or whatever. But back in whenever this was, I want to say 97 or 98, something like that. And then The End were a band that I got to see a lot when I was in my late teens, early 20s. The vocalist went on to be the vocalist for Bloodwolf and Rotten UK, if you're familiar with those bands. The End were crust punk. They were trying to do something a little bit different, though. I feel like, I was hanging out with these guys when they wrote all this stuff and recorded all this stuff. And we all kind of discovered the Profane Existence stuff and the Minneapolis scene and all that, like around the same time, kind of transitioned out of the Casualties and whatever and got into like Ass Rash and Misery and bands like that. And it seemed like they took those influences, but they also weren't afraid to like throw in some breakdowns. Like you could tell they were from New York. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of influence of like New York hardcore and stuff like that on here. They were a cool band for sure. They had a demo, a split 7-inch with a Global Threat, and I think that was it. So this came out on the same imprint that the Nocturnal Trinity did, which is Tumblety Tapes. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see what they have. I think all their tapes are really limited. They're like 25 copies each, but the singer from The End there who runs that label also put out my old band, The Cronies. So if you want to hear me sing in a like a blank 77 Casualties style band, if that's what you want to do with your life, feel free to check that out. I talked about this, but I'll talk about it again, just because homeboy from Mortville was so kind to send me these fine discs. This is BRB Barbarossus Rhubarber Barbarin, which I'm sure the pronunciation isn't correct for that. They were German. This is like Kakasonica, like a huge compilation. This is only one disc though, of a grind band, noise grind, if you will, that were around back in the 90s. See, a split with Darkland, Rendezvous. Yeah, there's a couple tapes on here. Perverted Taste was the label they were on. And again, noisy, not really giving too much of a crap, just freaking out, kind of raw grindcore stuff. Occasionally tongue-in-cheek stuff. I believe the first song on this is a grind cover of the Batman theme and stuff like that. There's, not really taking themselves seriously, having some fun with it if you want. And then the new Wedge, which is along with this next one, it's hard to pick. A lot of these CDs I really dug a lot. This is one of my favorites from the Mortville stuff that I got sent. Grindcore Penitentiary. Grindcore Penitentiary. Oh boy. I talked about Wedge a little bit ago. Some other Mortville stuff that Ben sent me. And man, this is just an entire concept record, like a rock opera, even if you will, about a grindcore prison. It's like all kinds of like weird in jokes, and if you know a fair amount about grind, you'll probably get a lot of them. It's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff. Wedge musically, drum machine grind, super fast. I'd say if you dig like Slap-a-Ham kind of stuff, they're along those lines. A little bit more brutal, kind of death metal-y stuff here and there, but certainly, if you like kind of lighthearted fastcore sort of stuff, their earlier records did have sort of a weird like tiki island sort of surf theme that's not on this. They're focused on telling this story of of this grindcore prison. I think they're one of the best ones is Shane Embry's been found guilty of being in too many bands, and now he can add impulse manslaughter to the list. And then we got Captain Three Leg Burt Bacharach. I love this cover art. This like mid-century chill, like something that'd be hanging in a therapist's office or something. Yeah, Captain Three Leg, again, a band that's been around forever. I consider myself fortunate to finally be getting acquainted with them now. This is also great, really fucking blasting, intense grind. Again, kind of out there, silly lyrics. Burt Bacharach, I feel like is a little bit more immediate, like has even shorter songs, but is kind of along the same lines. But both are very, very, very cool. I love this sort of Blue Note jazz thing they're doing with the layout and everything. It's fun. And then finally, we got this Legion. I wanted to pick this up because I used to have a 7-inch, and this band's been around for ages. They were from Ontario. I'm not sure if it was Hamilton or Toronto or what, but they're from Ontario. And they were talked about pretty extensively on an episode of the first 7-inch club. They talked about their 7-inch. And I was like, man, I used to have that back in the day. And I remember it being way more metal. And it's not. I mean, this is very satanic themed, but it's Crust. Almost kind of epic Crust or stadium Crust, like along the lines of Tragedy, but darker and more evil and less like triumphant kind of melodies. But it has that like good sounding, well played, kind of riffing style, kind of Crust stuff. And I mean, these guys have been around for ages and I think are still doing stuff. This is from sometime, I want to say in the late 90s or early 2000s, but their CDs are super cheap. I picked up a couple of them. They're all pretty similar in sound. This came out in 2000. They're all pretty similar in sound, but they have this kind of really blasphemous kind of take on Crust. There's a little bit of death metal in there, here and there, and black metal, but it's mostly dark, well played Crust punk that is satanic and dark and well played. All right, well, that was the playlist. Everybody have a good day. If you want to talk about any of the releases or comment sections, you know where it is. Yeah, like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. All right.